Imagine a product so potent it spins off profit without forging any tangible good. So invisible, most buyers never notice they are purchasing it day after day. That product is debt. And far from being a neutral ledger entry, debt has been deliberately engineered into the most lucrative product humanity has ever scaled. It has bankrolled wars, toppled regimes, shackled nations, and quietly siphoned the savings of ordinary people. Yet, ask where debt originated, who refined it, and why it dominates modern finance, and most will struggle to answer. The history of debt is not merely economic bookkeeping. It doubles as the chronicle of money and of power. At its simplest, debt is a promise. You take resources today and agree to repay tomorrow. But nested inside that promise is the core mechanism of control: interest. By charging interest, the future is harvested as profit. Societies have wrestled with this for millennia. In ancient Mesopotamia, obligations were pressed into clay, and rulers periodically wiped the slates in sweeping debt jubilees because they knew that when too many citizens were trapped, production stalled, and society fractured. The Hebrew tradition codified periodic cancellation. Every 50th year, freedom from debts. The logic was straightforward: unchecked debt could enslave entire populations. Move forward through centuries and the pattern shifts. Elites stop erasing debt and start weaponizing it. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now, let's continue. Medieval Europe is a case study. The Catholic Church denounced usury, excessive interest, but merchants and bankers learned to route around the rulebook. They reframed loans as disguised trade deals and invented credit instruments that looked like commerce rather than credit. By the Renaissance, families like the Medici raised empires not by sowing fields or commanding armies, but by lending to everyone who did. They financed popes and princes, backed voyages and wars, and in return accumulated not only cash flow, but political leverage. Debt was evolving from a private financial arrangement into an engine of power. The turning point arrived in the 17th century with the rise of state debt. Struggling for independence, the Dutch Republic sold bonds to its own citizens. Investors bought claims on the treasury, clipped coupons for interest, and traded the bonds like property. War was no longer bound by a king's pile of bullion. It could be financed seemingly without limit by selling slices of the future. England adopted the blueprint. The creation of the Bank of England in 1694 institutionalized national debt as a permanent fixture. Instead of begging magnates for emergency loans, the state borrowed from a central bank that issued notes against those loans. From then on, debt was not a temporary bridge. It was a way of life. Sovereigns rolled obligations forward endlessly, and the bankers who managed the machinery became indispensable. Profits ballooned. Lending to governments was the safest game in town because taxation could be raised to make creditors whole. Wars that once bankrupted monarchs could be fought without immediate ruin. Those wars expanded empires, opened ports, and spawned fresh markets. Each new frontier, a reason to borrow more. A feedback loop locked in. The more nations fought, the more they borrowed. The more they borrowed, the richer the creditor class became. By the 18th and 19th centuries, bond markets in London, Paris, and Amsterdam pulsed as the beating heart of global finance. Armies marched, fleets sailed, colonies changed hands on credit. Industrial capitalism pulled ordinary people into the circuit. Railways, factories, canals, and utilities rose on borrowed money. Workers earned wages from firms funded by loans and bonds, then borrowed in their turn to buy homes, tools, and later consumer goods. Debt seeped into every layer of life. By the 20th century, finance no longer sold debt only to kings and tycoons. It sold it to everyone. Mortgages, car loans, installment plans, student loans, and finally credit cards normalized borrowing as the default condition of modern existence. Here lies the hidden brilliance and the hidden cruelty. Debt does not pay once, it pays forever. Every interest installment transfers wealth from debtor to creditor, month after month, year after year. A refrigerator is bought once. A loan extracts streams of payment that can dwarf the sticker price. A 30-year mortgage often doubles the cost of a house. A revolving credit card balance can grow faster than a paycheck. What begins as a promise can harden into a trap. Debt is therefore not just a financial tool. It is the most successful business model devised. No factory required, no warehouse, No raw inputs only, contracts, signatures, and the authority to turn promises into money. Those who grasped this earliest, the merchants of Amsterdam, the bankers of London, the financiers of New York, became architects of the modern system. That system does not merely manage debt, it manufactures it, expands it, and depends on its growth to survive. Mid-20th century geopolitics cemented the architecture. In 1944, the Bretton Woods agreements ushered in a new framework. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created to lend to countries in distress or development. Behind the rhetoric of cooperation sat a simple dynamic: debt as discipline. Nations could borrow, but on conditions set by creditors. The IMF, effectively steered by the United States and Europe, attached structural adjustment terms to assistance. Cut this, privatize that, reorder budgets to please balance sheets abroad. Debt matured into a lever of policy. Governments that overborrowed found sovereignty diluted. Agendas were rewritten far from their capitals. Meanwhile, consumer credit conquered the household. After World War II, banks discovered they could sell debt the way companies sell appliances, as a lifestyle. The mortgage became the crown jewel of the middle-class dream: home ownership for millions, in exchange for 30 years of payments, car loans, furniture installments, store cards, and ultimately mass-market credit cards turned credit into a product pushed on television and in mailboxes. The psychology flipped. Borrowing was no longer a shame. It was a ticket to prosperity. Buy now, pay later. For banks, the model was a goldmine. Millions of small interest streams compounding with clockwork regularity. For governments, it juiced demand even as wages flattened. For corporations, it guaranteed customers who could spend beyond cash on hand. Debt became capitalism's hidden engine. And unlike manufacturing, credit was infinitely scalable. You did not need to refine ore or lay bricks to expand it. You needed signatures and the plumbing to create money against future cash flow. Addiction was the risk, and addiction took hold. Banks preferred debts not to be retired, but to be rolled, refinanced, extended. The longer the obligation lived, the more profitable the relationship. Politicians learned that borrowing was easier than raising taxes. Central banks supplied the lubricant liquidity on tap to keep the carousel spinning. Debt ceased to be a bridge between moments. It became the permanent architecture of the economy. By the 1970s and 1980s, consequences arrived. Developing countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia had borrowed heavily in boom years as Western banks recycled petrodollars after oil shocks. When Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker hiked interest rates, servicing costs exploded. The crisis broke open in 1982 when Mexico declared it could not pay. The remedy was familiar: more loans under harsher terms, mediated by the IMF and World Bank. Nations borrowed to survive, then borrowed again to repay, ceding policy space with each turn of the ratchet. Citizens endured austerity, inflation, joblessness. Elites and creditors collected interest. In rich countries, finance engineered a new meta-product. Debt itself became inventory. Mortgages, auto loans, credit card receivables, and corporate bonds were bundled, sliced, and sold worldwide. The bank that originated a loan could offload it, book fees, and originate the next one. Risk was said to be distributed. In reality, it was obscured. This financialization turned credit into the raw material of Wall Street's factory floor. The crash of 2008 was the natural outcome. Trillions of mortgage-linked securities, built on the premise that U.S. homeowners would not default in unison, imploded. When the chain snapped, the global system juddered. Governments intervened, not to liquidate the sellers of bad paper, but to rescue them, revealing again who the architecture exists to protect. Families lost houses, jobs, and savings. Banks were backstopped. Then, astonishingly, debt did not shrink. It grew. The catastrophe birthed its own cure: central bank intervention and ultra-low interest rates that encouraged still more borrowing. By now, debt was indispensable. Governments financed deficits, corporations borrowed to repurchase shares, households leaned on credit to maintain living standards. Without constant rollover, the structure would falter. Debt had become the product that sustains everything else, endlessly issued, endlessly serviced. It was the perfect business because it required minimal innovation and no physical inputs, only confidence from borrowers and legal protection for creditors. After 2008, central banks slashed rates to zero or near zero and flooded balance sheets with bond purchases, promising stability. The medicine supercharged the addiction. Cheap money encouraged every sector to borrow. Today, the global debt pile towers into the hundreds of trillions, several times world output. Politicians still cite rising GDP as progress, but much of that activity is borrowed from tomorrow. Debt has become so normalized that few question it. A 20-year-old signs decades of student loans and is told it's an investment. A couple takes a 30-year mortgage and calls it a dream. Governments run chronic deficits and voters shrug because the effects hide in the short run. Inflation. The silent tax chips away at purchasing power while preserving the nominal values that make the system appear sound. Much of what passes for prosperity is leverage stacked upon leverage. Meanwhile, the profitability of debt only swells. Banks earn interest on loans, but they also profit from servicing, refinancing, and collection. Investors speculate on sovereign bonds, arbitraging yields, and betting on the credit of entire nations. Hedge funds buy distressed obligations, harvesting returns from collapse. Credit rating agencies, presented as neutral referees, become gatekeepers that raise or lower the toll for access to capital. Debt is not just a product. It is a marketplace where promises are minted, priced, traded, and exploited. This machinery concentrates wealth. Each coupon payment moves money from the many to the few. Over time, streams of household payments pool on the balance sheets of the largest banks and funds. Those with assets borrow cheaply to buy more, multiplying wealth with leverage. Those without assets borrow dearly, trapped in cycles that are hard to escape. Debt becomes a polished mirror of class division. Consider how compound interest quietly amplifies this dynamic. An interest charge is not only a fee for time, it is a multiplier on power. Compounding converts a trickle into a river. Miss one payment, and the river floods. A debt that grows at 18% annually doubles in roughly 4 years, at 24% in about 3. The math is simple. The lived experience is not. For a household, compounding means the future is pre-spent. For a creditor, it means time itself is inventory. Each day another fractional gain booked with mechanical certainty. The same pattern appears at smaller scales. Payday loans and rent-to-own contracts target the vulnerable with high rates wrapped in friendly branding. Buy now, pay later apps cloak borrowing in the language of convenience. Small businesses juggle merchant cash advances that skim daily revenue. Everywhere the offer is framed as access, as empowerment. The price is long-term extraction. Public finance has its own circuits and rituals. Government deficits are serenaded as stimulus in busts and as investment in booms. Few ask what portion of that spending will be serviced forever. The bond market, that quiet court of opinion, rewards some budgets and punishes others, nudging elected leaders toward choices that keep the streams to creditors secure. When yields rise, policy changes follow. When yields fall, appetites grow. The scoreboard is denominated in basis points. The consequences are counted in schools funded, hospitals staffed, and infrastructure deferred. Language masks these trade-offs. We call it leverage instead of fragility, liquidity instead of dependence, innovation instead of engineering around old guardrails. Collateralized debt obligations become structured products. Bailouts are backstops. Austerity is consolidation. Words convert extraction into expertise. Education is an emblematic case. The promise is straightforward. Borrow for a degree now and enjoy higher earnings later. For many, the promise holds. For others, salaries disappoint while balances persist. The debt cannot be easily discharged. It shadows life choices, where to work, when to marry, whether to start a company or buy a home. The loan that financed opportunity can quietly ration it, not with chains but with monthly statements. Housing tells a similar story. Mortgages turn shelter into a leveraged bet on future prices and wages. When markets rise, owners cheer. When they fall, households with little equity discover that the bank owns most of the house. Refinancing offers relief, at a cost, with fees and years added to the clock. The dream remains real for many, but the mechanism remains the same, long streams of payment flowing uphill. Internationally, the choreography of sovereign debt is almost theatrical. Technocrats fly in, spreadsheets in hand, to negotiate primary surpluses and privatizations. Public utilities once built with tax money are sold to service bills owed abroad. The goal is confidence. The effect is often a transfer of public assets into private hands, while the debt stock lingers. Even successful restructurings leave a residue. Policy space narrowed, choices bounded by covenants, priorities reordered around maturity schedules. Technology did not end these patterns, it accelerated them. Credit scoring algorithms compress human complexity into bureaucratic digits. Alternative data, your location pings, your online shopping, your ride-hail history, feeds new models of who deserves which rate. Fintech platforms promise frictionless inclusion, and for many, they deliver speed and access. But the logic is unchanged. Scale up the distribution of obligations, skim the payments, and lay off the tail risks to whoever buys the paper next. The cultural story matters too. For decades, advertising taught us that a line of credit is a passport to the life we want. Music videos and magazines spread draped luxury over the language of aspiration. Schools taught compound interest in math class, but rarely taught how contracts compound risk over lifetimes. We celebrate the entrepreneur who leverages debt to build, less often the worker who quietly refuses the credit pitch and builds cushion first. Values are upstream of balance sheets. None of this implies debt is inherently evil. Credit can fund invention, bridge shocks, and spread opportunity. What the record shows is more modest and more sobering. When debt becomes the default setting, profits centralize and risks socialize. The cycle is not mysterious. It is mechanical. Profit accrues to the holder of time, lost to the one who must sell time to meet the next bill. So, where does agency live? It begins with literacy and with structure. On the personal level, bigger buffers, shorter terms, fixed rates when possible, skepticism toward teaser offers, and an insistence on understanding the full cost over the life of the obligation. On the civic level, transparency in public borrowing, bankruptcy frameworks that let honest failure reset the clock, consumer protection rules that align incentives, and watchdogs strong enough to see through complexity designed to obscure. On the global level, lending that respects sovereignty and aims at resilience rather than dependency. The pattern remains legible across eras. Clay tablets became parchment, which became ledgers, which became databases. Yet the flows are familiar. Promises are minted, interest is harvested, and power concentrates where claims on the future are owned. To see the pattern is not to deny progress. It is to remove the glamour and read the footnotes. Debt enriches the creditor class, burdens the debtor class, and nudges policy toward the protection of incumbents. If this reframed the way you see the world, subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our others video.